You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Welcome to The Past Macabre, where we journey through history to uncover how our relationship with death reflects the values, fears, and hopes that shape the way people live. I'm your host, Stephanie Rice. Thank you for joining me for episode 21, The Hungry Ghost Festival, from ancient China to modern celebrations around the world. Many different cultures from China and Southeast Asia honor the dead on the 15th day of the 7th lunar month. Known as Zhongyuan in Daoism and Yulanpen in Mahayana Buddhism, the Hungry Ghost Festival is a time to honor one's ancestors as well as any spirits known as the hungry ghosts who may be left wandering the afterlife without the proper offerings. These hungry ghosts can indiscriminately possess anyone who crosses their path, so things like swimming or whistling after dark should be avoided if you don't want to catch their attention. And you should especially avoid angering them by touching any offerings left for them. Off limits. The festival is inspired by the Buddhist tale of a son who performed acts of devotion at several Buddhist temples to free his mother's soul from hell. It's called the Ullambana Sutra in Sanskrit, and it's also known as Mulian Rescues His Mother from Hell. Mulian is the Chinese name of the protagonist of the story. This story resonated with Daoist beliefs and regional spiritual practices that predate either religion. In this episode, we'll look at the earliest evidence of writing in China, which includes references to the spirits of ancestors interfering with the affairs of the living. We'll explore how the festival came to be and then changes that it's undergone over time and as it spread to different places. And then we'll see how specific modern celebrations incorporate ancient traditions, honoring those lost in historical tragedies, and modern lifestyles. Now let's get started. The Hungry Ghost Festival is also known as Zhongyuan in Daoism and Yulanpen in Mahayana Buddhism. It's a very popular holiday in China and has also diffused to a lot of other cultures that have had a lot of contact with China, especially during Imperial China. The festival takes place traditionally on the 15th night of the 7th month of the lunar calendar, which in 2025 will fall on the 6th of September. During the 7th month of the lunar calendar, it's said to be the ghost month because during the first day of the month, the gates of the underworld are open, and every spirit, regardless of intentions, whether it's good, bad, or just to be a little bit naughty, will come to the world of the living and wander through and accept all sorts of offerings in order to appease them and prevent them from either directly possessing you in the most extreme or just kind of messing with you in some cases. During the entire ghost month, there's a lot of things that are restricted or else they're really bad luck and could get you possessed. Some of these things will be such as going swimming. That could get you possessed by the souls of someone who drowned. If you are caught out at night whistling, then that could get you possessed. It basically calls attention to the evil spirits with negative intentions. If you leave your laundry out to dry on a clothesline overnight, it's also said that ghosts might decide to try on the clothes and linger with them and potentially possess you when you put them on. In some of the more modern traditions, it's seen as bad luck taking the last bus or train at night because that could also be filled with the spirits of the dead. And it's also bad luck to take photos at night, again, because you could anger the ghosts who might not want to be captured. One of the most important taboos during Ghost Month, though, is to never, ever touch any of the offerings that are left for the dead. This can be money, food, burning paper versions of these things. Any of that's burned or set outside of someone's home on the streets during this month, that is meant to appease the wandering spirits, whether they're relatives or even strangers. And if anyone comes along and picks them up, the ghost that they were meant for is going to be very upset. The main part of the month, which is the 15th day of the month, is when the Hungry Ghost Festival is celebrated specifically. And it's a wonderful syncretic mix of Confucianism, Buddhism, Daoism, as well as regional spiritual practices that date back even further than any of those religions. The proper festival of it all started actually as a Buddhist holiday, which was inspired by a specific story that's known as the Ullambana Sutra, or in Chinese, it's known as the story of Mulian Saves His Mother. Ullambana also has the same meaning as Yulanpen, which is why that's also the term for it in Mahayana Buddhism. The festival is very heavily focused on this specific story. According to the myth, Mulian, or Modgalyayana, as he was known in the original Sanskrit version, found out that his mother was condemned to hell after she died. The worst layer of Buddhist hell, actually, which is basically a hell of eternal torment. Now, as with every single myth, there are variations based on region, time period that this is told. So the reason why Mulian's mother was there is not always clear. Sometimes it's for simple mistakes. Sometimes it's for intentional horrible misdeeds, such as feeding meat to all of the Buddhist monks nearby, which was very much a taboo. And so whenever he learned this, Mulian petitioned the Buddha, because he was one of the top tier students of the Buddha, to help him figure out a way that he could free his mother's soul from this eternal suffering, because she wouldn't be able to be reincarnated until she got through this, which does not sound pleasant for millennia and millennia. The Sanskrit versions of the story call the final level of hell Avici, but in the Chinese versions of the story, they generally call it DU, which roughly translates to earth prison, because the Buddhist concept of a multi-layered hell or multiple hells came long after the Chinese traditions of this earth prison. So Mulian learned that the only way that he would be able to get his mother out of DU was by making offerings in her honor at pretty much every single Buddhist temple that he could possibly reach. This was considered an act of selflessness because, one, it would take a lot of effort and time for Mulian to do this, but also because it was on behalf of his mother, so it was seen more as like a selfless act from her as well. After many trips and many offerings, Mulian was finally able to clear his mother's name, essentially. But during his journey to attempt to actually go and retrieve her to bring her back out of the last layer of hell, he saw all of the other souls that were suffering. Mulian realized that he couldn't only save his mother's soul, and he went through a lot of effort to save all of the souls from hell from then on, at least according to some variations. Again, it definitely depends on the region. In some versions of the story, Mulian never even set foot in any hell. All he did was free his mother, and she was able to be reincarnated. So there wasn't an exact trip back out of hell. It was instead her spirit was finally lifted from that torture. Even though there are many variations of the story, the core of the story is to give offerings to Buddhist monks in filial piety, which essentially means ancestral worship, in order to honor the dead and in order to continue traditions for each generation. So in recognition of this, the original celebrations of the Hungry Ghost Festival, which were first documented around 500 CE, they actually had all of the offerings being given to the Buddhist monks on behalf of the deceased. So in a way, they were supporting the temples and the monks so that they could continue their teachings and studies and meditations in order to enlighten everyone, which is generally one of the core concepts behind Mahayana Buddhism. Not to get into the in-depth variations of Buddhism, but Mahayana essentially believes in a selfless act of helping everyone achieve that final ascension instead of personally only working on yourself. And so this festival came to be as a chance to be able to do that essentially en masse, which helps a lot when you have people who are going to be scattered throughout smaller communities or different like farming areas. So they can only come together during brief periods of time instead of constantly being around. So therefore, it's a good time to just gather and remember the dead and also honor those who are currently serving the community. The Hungry Ghost Festival itself, in name, only dates to about 500 CE, as I said, but the concept of it resonated very deeply with Chinese traditions of ancestor worship that already existed long before Buddhism or even Confucianism or Daoism arrived in China. The oldest of the oracle bones date to the Shang Dynasty, and that's the first confirmed dynasty of China. There is also a first dynasty that's considered mythical so far because no confirmed evidence have been found of them. The Xia dynasty is only attested to in much, much later texts. They don't have a form of writing as far as we know. Again, archaeologists have yet to find any conclusive evidence belonging to them. There is material culture in China that dates to before the Shang dynasty. The difference is just determining whether or not the Xia dynasty is actually that older material culture or a different indigenous group of people. But the interesting thing about the oracle bones and the writing on them, they are already fully formed with a grammar style, and there's not the growth of the language seen within the oracle bones as is seen in the very earliest hieroglyphs in Egypt. So that shows us that prior to these oracle bones, there was already a writing system in place and used long enough that it was widely established to have a very strict structure to it that can be fairly easily translated now once the concept of it was initially cracked by archaeologists. One of the most famous kings from the Shang dynasty, who we know definitely existed. There's, again, also mythical rulers within the Shang dynasty as well. Some of them are real people that were just essentially given bigger and grander stories as time went on. Some of them, there's no evidence of that, the fact that they actually existed. But as far as we know, the king Wu Ding did exist. There are a lot of texts attributed to him. He actually is the reason why we have so many oracle bones. The majority of them are actually from him. Specifically, he asked a lot of questions of his ancestors. And it's also thanks to these oracle bones that we know Fu Hao, who was Wu Ding's wife and queen, was a very powerful military leader, a warrior queen essentially, and she was a high priestess. She held very high esteem, lots of power, was incredibly smart, and we can tell because of the amount of times that Wu Ding petitioned specifically about her and referenced her as a military general. Fu Hao may sound familiar. She is the owner of one of the most famous tombs that was found intact for anyone who does follow along with Chinese archaeology. It also ended up making news. It was pretty big because to date, it's the only intact Shang Dynasty tomb that has been found. Every other Shang Dynasty tomb that has been found was not excavated by archaeologists. It was looted and then destroyed. And so it was very important that Fu Hao's tomb was found because it provided a huge picture that we didn't have before when it comes to the material culture of the Shang Dynasty. One of my favorites is a jade phoenix carving that was found in the tomb, along with over 700 other jade artifacts and over 500 oracle bones that were just Fu Hao's that were buried with her. So who knows how many others she used within her lifetime that weren't specifically buried with her. These were essentially the highlights of things that went right. One interesting thing is, as you would expect, there's not a lot of records of the king's petitions being wrong. So it does seem that there was a bit of favoritism shown by the ancestor spirits or by whoever was doing the oracle readings in order to ensure that whatever the king was petitioning was already going to go well. Another wonderful thing about her tomb is that it was in a place where it hadn't been built over yet at all. So there's actually evidence that there was a structure above her tomb as well that hadn't been disturbed, though over time all of the wood has pretty much rotted away. But the structure would have been built over the tomb, and it most likely served as a sort of like ancestral worship hall. So again, with the concept of ancestral ghosts playing an important role in the everyday lives of the first dynasty, and most likely all of the people who, if not a dynasty, but the people who came before them, it would have been very important that there would have still been rituals held here for quite a while. Now the tomb has been reopened, so you can see Fu Hao's tomb if you travel to China, and they have actually restored that above ground structure above the tomb as well. Based off of the dimensions that were found and a lot of the material artifacts, they can guess as to how it would have been designed and laid out. So that's very cool. So if you ever find yourself in the present-day city of Anyang, I highly recommend going to visit the tomb. I would absolutely love to. If I ever get a chance, I will definitely be going there. Wu Ding and Fu Hao ruled around 1200 BCE. And so all of these spiritual practices were continued to be practiced over time. There's a lot of similarities as the other dynasties follow the Shang Dynasty. And then around 500 BCE, Confucianism and Daoism start to appear in China. And they also, essentially, they just build upon what was already there in what's called either Chinese traditional beliefs, Chinese folklore. It kind of just depends on the text and who you talk to, what it's called. But those essentially indigenous beliefs of the Chinese that came before Confucianism and Daoism was folded into those schools of thought and elaborated upon, basically. Confucius especially still leaned heavily into the ancestor veneration and honoring one's ancestors. He just made a point to clarify that you should not be honoring the dead other than your own personal ancestors. And while Confucianism doesn't have as many of the specifically what we would identify as religious aspects, it's always difficult to apply the Western concept of religion to other places because it's not the same. They're not going to a specific church every single Sunday with a specific dogma only. What they're going to do is it's going to be part of their everyday lives. It's going to impact the way that people live. This belief system is going to ultimately be closer to what we would imagine like Christian monks are, which like the prayers every day sort of thing, but not in a sort of religious reverence sense. It's more in a sense of this is just a part of life, the same as any natural phenomenon is a part of life, the same as any ritual practice that isn't based in religion, such as someone who has the same exact time of day that they do some sort of like exercise. It just is a part of them. And now Taoism does have a little bit more of what we would view as the religious aspects when it comes to viewing the way that the world works compared to Confucianism. And so Taoism does have a very specific set of traditions that are associated with the Hungry Ghost Festival, while Confucianism generally, it's not against celebrating the festival, but it's also not a specific festival that's recognized exclusively by Confucianism. But the Taoism version of it came about during the Tang Dynasty, which was about 618 to 904 CE. And that was pretty much the rise of Taoism in China when it became really popular. During that time, it wasn't replacing Buddhism necessarily. It was just being incorporated with Buddhism, which came to China around 50 CE. So all of these beliefs were kind of intermingling throughout China, and then you add in regional variances and you get the Hungry Ghost Festival. Now, according to the Daoist tradition of the festival, the 15th day of the 7th lunar month marks the birthday of one of the supreme beings known as the Officer of Earth, or the Diguan. He's one of the 3 primordial emperors or sage kings They've got many epithets that have been translated roughly into English many different ways, but there's one king of heaven, one king of earth, and one king of water. The Daoist name for the festival, which is Zhongyuan, refers to Diguan's status as the center or middle official between heaven and water. Zhong essentially translates to in the center of, or in the middle of. And the officer of earth, Diguan, he rules over the underworld essentially. As I said before, it's not specifically an exact translation to hell. It's DU, which is earth prison. So all of the spirits are going to be there, but not all of them are going to be necessarily bad ghosts or negative ghosts or even, just pranksters. But whenever he leaves, the gates are open and every spirit can come out and join him as he's essentially touring the mortal realm. In some places, it's said that this is the one time of the year that the officer of earth pays his respects to the Buddha in a way to honor the fact that this is a syncretic merging of several different religions. And in fact, in some places, both Buddhist temples and Daoist temples will host priests of the other in order to have a combined ceremony of sorts. In some places, the officer of earth is seen as coming to our mortal plane in order to pass judgment on the sins of all of the souls, whether they are able to actually be cleansed of their souls and they're ready for the next step of the afterlife or of reincarnation, depending on which they believe in. And then if he deems them as worthy, they're able to continue. Those who are not, continue their time in the earth prison. While every soul is able to roam free during this celebration in the mortal realm, the hungry ghosts specifically are the souls that are already doomed to wander. And according to Buddhist beliefs, they're the ones who were condemned to the different layers of hells. And they're called the hungry ghosts because they can't eat the offerings that are given to them, and there are no longer any offerings left for them. So they are unable to sustain themselves and they continue to slowly wither away. In a lot of art, they're depicted as very emaciated, suffering from malnourishment, very narrow necks and scrawny bodies that are barely able to support them, just to show that they're basically wasting away for eternity. Unfortunately, anybody can become a hungry ghost. It's either because of something that they did during their lifetime, like their own actions were evil, or they basically tricked their neighbors a lot. They were very notorious for doing bad deeds, or, downright murderers. Or they could be condemned because they died violent deaths at the hands of murderers, or it could have been because their family stopped giving them offerings, either because they no longer chose to remember them or because too much time had passed and they had become forgotten. But there were many reasons that anyone could become a hungry ghost. And then this concept sort of led to this communal care towards spirituality when it came to the ghosts. And while the offerings had originally began as donations to the Buddhist temples, as I said before, then that changed to offerings to the spirits directly, but only of ancestors. But then very shortly after that, it switched to these offerings for any ghost who might need it, who may have been forgotten, may no longer have family able to provide for them. So that way they wouldn't be left to cause any sort of troubles to anyone in the mortal realm that they could possibly cause any damage to. The festival has continued to change over the centuries and evolve with the times. Joss paper offerings, the papers that are burned during a lot of different Chinese festivals and Eastern Asian festivals, those started in general around 250 to 300 CE during the Three Kingdoms period, which gamers may recognize from all sorts of games, but most especially the Romance of the Three Kingdoms and Dynasty Warriors. So there's also the classic book written in China in the 14th century, I believe, that all of that is based off of, which is the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. And during that time, there was a lot of military conflict and famine, and so people still needed to leave offerings for the dead, but money and food could no longer really be buried with them or left out for them. So people started using paper money, and most especially during the Jin period, which was right after the Three Kingdoms period, we have in the archaeological record gold foil coins that were made to replace the actual coins and burials of the elite. So even the elite started hurting and needed to start using paper after long periods of warfare and long periods of drought and famine. Texts from the 12th century are the first to specifically identify burning joss paper offerings as part of the Hungry Ghost Festival, though it was confirmed that the burning of joss paper offerings had happened earlier with other festivals, especially the Chinese New Year. That was celebrated with the burning of papers that had been printed with woodblock printing that would be celebrated at the beginning of the lunar year, and they would be printed with the gods and then also whichever the zodiac animal it was for that year. And then at the end of the celebrations, those would be burned. Part of the joss paper offerings for the Hungry Ghost Festival evolved beyond just paper money and then symbols for food. They started including paper replicas, or what are called mingqi, or spirit objects, which were found in ancient elite tombs, which are mostly like the clay figurines. And in even earlier periods, they would have been actual sacrifices, especially figurines and sacrifices of horses and chariots and servants and things that the elites and the rulers would have needed in the afterlife in order to entertain and sustain them. Modern celebrations generally include these concepts of the spirit objects as well. And there's not just the burning of paper money and symbolically burning any sort of like food. There's also things like paper clothing that's made both to look like traditional dress as well as modern clothing. Then people will also burn paper luxuries. There will be very huge joss paper houses, mansions essentially, that are burned. There's been festivals that have shown these huge dragon boats, which are meant to carry the soul into the afterlife, that have become hugely elaborate now during some of the festivities. There will be versions of different luxury cars that are made out of joss paper and then burned for the dead to have in the afterlife. Specifically, joss paper Ferraris are fairly popular in the stores that I've seen around LA. There's also joss paper Apple products, like you can get an iPhone, an Apple Watch, the AirPods, pretty much everything. You can get Rolex watches made out of joss paper. You can get jewelry that looks exactly like designer jewelry because it's got foil on it to make it look like it's like gold or silver. So they're really ready to send off anyone into the afterlife who needs any sort of supplies with everything they could possibly have and anything that can make them comfortable. The modern celebrations will also include a lot of traditional theater or opera. And then any shows that are put on will have the front rows left open for the spirits to be able to enjoy the shows as well. Some places will include hanging the food offerings for the ghosts that are actual food offerings off of very large poles. And the offerings will be things like rice balls and oil, like pretty basic supplies that will last them in the afterlife. And then once the festival ends, generally every celebration includes paper boats that are in the shape of the lotus with a candle in the center, or in the shape of a small shrine with a candle in the center. And each one is in honor of a dead soul. And it's said that whenever that candle in the center of the paper boat burns out, then the soul that it was dedicated to has returned to the afterlife. Festival traditions spread over the centuries, and now the Hungry Ghost Festival is celebrated all over the world. One example of a specific tradition comes from Kiu Li Tong Temple in Singapore, where they celebrate with a unique 3-day version of the festival. It's a significant location that honors the victims of the Suk Ching massacre, which happened in 1942 when the Japanese Imperial Army occupied Singapore. they killed between 25,000 to 50,000 people just because they had Chinese heritage. And it's already been said that it could have been possibly more because over time there have been more mass graves that were previously hidden that have been found by archaeologists. Survivors and their descendants believe that they became restless ghosts because of their violent deaths, those who at least believe in the traditions of the Hungry Ghost Festival. And the temple of Qiulitong was given special offerings to their souls since 1944 in order to appease them and sustain them in the afterlife as they're trapped wandering because of those violent deaths that they suffered. The temple is a Daoist temple specifically for the Henghua community, which is a language group that's from the Putian area of the Fujian province initially. And then a lot of them migrated via lots of families to Singapore. And so there's a direct connection there with that specific community and their celebrations that have managed to be preserved by this diasporatic community. So once every 10 years, this Daoist temple does this universal salvation ritual, which is for anyone of any faith. And they also invite Buddhist monks. And over these 3 days of this celebration, the Daoist monks and the Buddhist monks are constantly performing rituals and rites in order to contact the dead, appease the dead, honor the dead in their various traditions. So that way, once every 10 years, this huge celebration is a time for people to come from all over the world in order to honor their ancestors. And basically any possible prayer that you want or any way of communicating with the dead or any way of honoring the dead is covered here. And at the beginning of the festival, there's a huge 11 meter or 36 foot tall pole that's topped with streamers and a traditional lantern. And that's supposed to guide all of the lost souls to the temple. So that way they're also brought here in order to gain the offerings that everyone from all across the countryside and even further are coming in order to offer them here. There's an opera troupe here that does a special performance of the story of Mulian rescuing his mother that actually includes a unique Henghua community twist that has a ritual within the play itself that is meant to rescue the souls of the deceased loved ones of the audience who believe that their ancestors or relatives or recently deceased might need rescuing or a bit of a push into the next step of the afterlife. And the performance starts with the ritual cleansing of the location where the play is going to be performed, which is usually a large temporary bamboo stage that's set up to look very traditional and includes all sorts of specific iconography that has very deep meaning to the play and the ritual itself. All of the cast members will be dressed in traditional dress, and as they perform, the actor who is playing Mulian is also essentially playing the role of a priest, as he's the one who's going to be reciting that ritual to rescue the souls. It's during the part of the play where Mulian has traveled through the hells and has learned not only of his mother being able to come out of hell, but that he's seen all of the other souls that are trapped in hell as he was going on his journey to rescue his mother. And so here at this point in the play, any audience members who have a loved one that they want to include in this ritual will come to the front of the stage, and most of the time they're holding photos of their loved one, and they'll chant their names as the actor playing Mulian performs the rites, and it covers each one of them. And then once that ritual is performed within the play and the Mulian within the play rescues the souls from hell, that is also seen as the souls of the deceased loved ones of the audience members being rescued from hell as well. And as I said, these are unique to this community and their diaspora. So these rituals have been carefully preserved for generations now. And they are, as far as I could tell in my research at least, the way that the play is performed is still done in the traditional way that dates back centuries to the Putian people. Other communities will, instead of doing a specific cultural center's tradition, they'll incorporate traditions from all over China, especially in like the Chinese diaspora communities in California, where many people from China who were in poverty came from all over China. And they came to America during the gold rush in order to seek their fortune. And American employers would bring them over as indentured laborers because they couldn't afford the passage themselves. And so they faced a lot of racist laws, a lot of discrimination, and they were forced to work pretty dangerous jobs. Many died on the job. So the Ghost Festival became one of the celebrations that the entire community would come together in order to observe, in order to connect with their home, even if it wasn't specifically their core tradition from their exact home city. Because again, they were separated. A lot of people were brought here completely separate from their families. So they had families back home that they were sending money to support whatever they could, like wives and children, but they were left here alone. Some of them didn't even have anyone who was from the same province or state as them. And therefore, they were just left with these community celebrations as the closest thing that they could get. San Francisco specifically celebrates with the unique Ghost King Parade during their festival in Chinatown, and it honors the early Chinese immigrants and all that they went through, and the whole festival itself also does a really great job of actually sharing history as well as the ways that different culture groups came together in order to rebuild Chinatown instead of the focus on only one celebration like it is at the temple in Singapore that I just shared. So here they also actually incorporate Indigenous and Latino communities, and they do a lot of education about the various ways that all cultures celebrate the dead. And this Ghost King Parade is sort of like the culmination of events at the night, and it goes through most of Chinatown, and it features lots of traditional performances like martial arts performances, dance performances, musical performances. There will be large public displays of art from various places all over the world, different diaspora communities. And so this is a way to honor the heritage of everyone who is from lots of different places and makes up San Francisco as it is now. And then in Los Angeles, it's very similar. The Los Angeles Ghost Festival has performances from lots of different regional traditions, and they showcase a lot of different regional artwork and cultural practices. And they also include a community resource fair, which features organizations like the Chinese Cultural Association and the Chinatown branch of the LA Public Library, and all sorts of resources for people who live within the broader Chinatown area, but also the broader Chinese diaspora community in LA County. And they also, because this time of year is fire season in Southern California, there are specific places that are set up to safely burn the offerings, since don't want to accidentally start a fire with any of the embers that would come off any of the offerings, because they spread very fast here. And so a lot of the funeral homes that are in large cemeteries across LA will cater to these specific types of rituals and practices in order to honor the dead. So they'll have places set up that people can safely burn offerings. And the temples that are across LA that are dedicated to Daoism or Buddhism will also have places where people can burn offerings. And there are some other places in Chinatown that will be set up as temporary safe places, assuming the weather will accommodate. And then there will be more of a formal setting for it in those places so that people can kind of take their turns instead of it being a bit of a crowded free-for-all, because LA is a crowded city. And then there will be also a lot of the local Asian youth groups of various backgrounds and from various places, whether it's some of the schools or just the smaller community theater organizations that'll be putting on their performances of all sorts of cultural plays, even the play that tells the story of how the Zodiac came to be, and the play that tells the story of the Monkey King. So it will be very cool. I'll be going to the LA one. So it will be very cool, and I'm excited. Another example would be in Taiwan, there's a tradition of ghost grappling that also happens during the festival. And that's where teams will they'll set up large poles similar to the flagpole for the celebration in Singapore, but in this case, the poles are topped with food offerings and they are greased. And then teams will race up the poles to grab a flag at the top. And this is a tradition that honors back when food was very scarce and offerings were having to be left up there. And essentially, this race came over time as people were doing this more and had more and more food offerings to finally give. So they would essentially compete to get their offerings up to the top for the gods. And in some periods, when there were periods of people struggling, then instead those races up to the top would be instead a way to honor the past of abundance and then disseminate what is there as offerings. Instead of to the gods, they would be given to the people who needed it. Another example is in the Guangxi province, instead of burning offerings, the festival includes hundreds and hundreds of lanterns that are floated down the river. It's usually called the River Lantern Festival instead of the Hungry Ghost Festival because of this. It also features singing, and it carries on for 3 days and 3 nights. And for the entire time, lanterns are floating down the river, and there's bamboo rafts with singers floating down the river with the lanterns as well in order to celebrate the dead. And a huge fireworks show is put on each night. There are many more examples of all sorts of variations in the way that people celebrate, but the core of it is that on the 7th month of the lunar calendar, on the 15th day, is when the Hungry Ghost Festival happens. And celebrations are meant to honor all of the deceased, and especially your ancestors, but also anyone else who might be left as a hungry ghost wandering around. And you never know when you might be a hungry ghost who also might need those offerings in the future. And all of these cultural festivals, one of the biggest things is that they continue to preserve ancient traditions for the next generation, even while modern changes mingle in. For example, like puppet shows that are put on during these festivals will preserve traditional stories. And performances of cultural music and dance will preserve these styles for the next generations as well. And family recipes are going to be preserved through the food that's shared in remembrance and taught with the children who learn how to cook for the next festivals. And the history of their ancestors is remembered and shared, sometimes with sharing communal trauma with especially diaspora communities and the hardships that they faced in order to get where they are today. And a lot of community connections are built or maintained during these festivals, and that's been a core part of it for centuries. Even with modern additions of fancy car offerings and mansion offerings and iPhones and tablets, the core of it is always going to maintain the same traditions. And that's ultimately the point of when these sorts of rituals to honor the dead and the ancestors are celebrated in these large communal ways. Thanks for joining me for this look at the Hungry Ghost Festival from ancient China to modern celebrations around the world. Remember, this year it's on Saturday, September the 6th, 2025. So if you have a chance and there's a celebration of the Hungry Ghost Festival that's happening anywhere near you, like Los Angeles or San Francisco or many major cities that have a Chinatown or a major Chinese cultural center, I highly recommend checking it out. Now, the next episode will kick off a series about sunken cities. We'll start with new finds from Canopus, the Ptolemaic and Roman city in the Mediterranean that sank around 200 BCE. It's been in the news lately because recently excavations took place at the sunken part of the city, and they pulled out a lot of statues that are going to be preserved and restored to the best of their ability and then placed in museums. So join me next time for a deeper look at the new discoveries and a general history of the city that lends its name to the canopic jars, which were the jars that the organs of the mummified were placed in and then preserved for as long as possible, though they generally didn't last as long as the mummy bodies themselves. Thanks for joining me again. Until next time. Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe to keep up with new releases. Please leave a rating and a comment. That helps the show reach others who may be interested in the past macabre. For access to bonus content from all Archaeology Podcast Network shows, become a member at archpodnet.com/members. That's archpodnet.com/members. You can find show notes for this and other episodes at archpodnet.com/TPM and follow Past Macabre on Instagram. That's PAST_MACABRE. You'll find pictures of the sites and artifacts discussed, Q&A sessions, and episode topic votes. Hope to see you there.
The Archaeology Podcast Network is 10 years old this year. Our executive producer is Ashley Airy, our social media coordinator is Matilda Siebrecht, and our chief editor is Rachel Roden. The Archaeology Podcast Network was co-founded by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle in 2014 and is part of Cultural Media and DigTech LLC.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.